In the Middle East, tensions between Israel and Hezbollah militants in Lebanon continue to escalate. Hospitals in northern Israel have now been told to prepare for a mass casualty scenario if war breaks out. Journalist Sarah Coates is in Tel Aviv with more.
These hospitals up in Israel's north, they have been put on war mode. And as you mentioned, they have been drilling for what they're calling a mass casualty event where many people could be brought into these facilities. So what we do know is that many of these hospitals up in the north, they actually have underground bunkers. So all of these wards that people would be brought into are underground and very much protected, but obviously not completely protected from any rocket attacks. Now, we do have unconfirmed reports coming in just over the last couple of minutes that an explosive drone has hit an area in Israel's Golan Heights, severely injuring a number of soldiers. Still no clarification on that, but what we can tell you is these tit-for-tat strikes are continuing across that border with Israel and Lebanon, with both Israeli leaders and also Iranian leaders basically saying that if in fact the Israelis do attack in Lebanon, that this would be an obliterating war. So certainly a lot of concern here over any potential miscalculation that could see the region slip into an all-out conflict.
That was journalist Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. And I want to stay on this story now. I'm joined by Hanin Ghaddar for her take on the likelihood of war and what we're seeing with this escalation. She's a senior fellow at the Washington Institute. Thanks very much for taking the time.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I want to start with that statement there, Iran's UN mission saying this week, if Israel embarks on a full-scale military aggression in Lebanon, quote, an obliterating war will ensue. What do you make of this statement? The purpose of this statement, was it in your mind to provoke or to deter?
This is the question, the main question today. So I think every statement coming out today from every state and every actor is to deter. Everybody's using narrative escalation in order. The goal of this narrative escalation, in addition, parallel to some military escalation, to some changes to the rules of engagement on the border, is all the main purpose of it is really to avoid the big-scale war and to force the other party to make compromises. Today, both Israel and Hezbollah do not need this war. Hezbollah's calculations, basically, from the very beginning, from the first thing that Hassan Nasrallah, leader of Hezbollah, said, he said, this is a Palestinian war, this is not our war. Hezbollah's main military assets are to protect Iran, Iran's nuclear program, and Iran's regime itself. It's not to protect Gaza or Palestinians or liberate Jerusalem. This is no longer their priority. If they use these assets today and go for the full war, Iran will be exposed. So for them, this is not this is definitely not an option. And for the Israelis as well, they do have more interest in going and resolving the Hezbollah risk on their border, because after October 7th, everyone now realizes that you cannot live with this kind of security risk on your border. However, the timing is of an essence. Today, the Israeli army needs to wrap up Gaza. They need to breathe a little bit, restock, and get the U.S. support, which is probably not going to happen before the elections. So they need a few months before launching a new war to Lebanon. But if they can get a compromise from Hezbollah, they don't need to go for that war, because this war, one, it will be very damaging for Israel as well, but also we don't know if it's actually going to resolve the Hezbollah risk, if it's going to actually eliminate the Hezbollah danger from Lebanon, or if it's going to actually be another war like 2006, which sat back Hezbollah a few years and then allowed them to strengthen their military capabilities, which is the case today, and make them even more of a danger.
And we're hearing.
So this is why everybody is escalating in the narrative in order to avoid this war and force the other to compromise.
Yeah, and when you speak of that narrative, we're hearing just in the last day or so, the Americans and the Europeans warning, don't count on the U.S. or anyone else being able to hold off Israeli plans for an offensive in Lebanon. What do you make of that?
Of course, at the end of the day, even 2006, it wasn't a U.S.-American decision. It wasn't an Israeli-U.S. decision. It was an Israeli decision, and the U.S. went ahead and supported it. So if Israel wants to do today a war against Hezbollah, the Americans can, either this administration or a next administration, this is a decision by Israel, and the U.S. can choose to support it or not. But they can warn them. They can tell them that we cannot give you as much as we can after the elections. They can warn and give alternatives, but they cannot stop really the Israelis at the end of the day of launching a war against Hezbollah if they feel this is vital for their security. And it is true in a way, but the Americans do have leverage that they can use. They have the leverage of the arms weapons, the arms sales. They have the leverage of all the weapons that today is being transferred to Israel or held back. This is the leverage of, like a military cooperation with Israel that the U.S., it's not just political support. What Israel needs from America is military support and logistical support. And this is something that the Israelis today are really concerned about. Will America give them all the support if they go without their blessing? But in any case, the Israelis also need to rest. They have a very exhausted army today, despite the fact that they do have a military deployment at the border that are not involved in Gaza, and they're just there at the border. They cannot maintain this forever. At one point, the political agreement is a must. The problem with the political agreement is who's going to make more compromises and where the buffer zone is going to be. Today, Hezbollah is trying to keep the buffer zone north of Israel, making sure that the north of Israel is empty, the residents cannot come back, and if they're using this as a leverage for negotiations. The Israelis are using their military force in order to create the other part of the border as a buffer zone, using the military, the scorched land strategy in order to make sure that the 5 kilometers away from the Lebanese border into Lebanon is unlivable, and the military infrastructure of Hezbollah is completely eliminated. This is where the buffer zone today, the negotiations over where the buffer zone is, and because there's no way Israel is going to accept Hezbollah at its border, and Hezbollah is trying its best today to make sure that the north is unoccupied, to try to get from these negotiations as much as they can internally for Iran and for themselves. But both need it. Both definitely need this kind of agreement that at least leads to a ceasefire, and then later we will see what happens. But they both need a ceasefire at this point.
We'll certainly be watching as this story continues to unfold in the coming days. That's all the time we have, but I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. That's Hanin Ghaddar.